All right, before we get started, just a quick FYI for you. We did post this as an open board meeting, so that means that Kim will be doing a recording of it and putting that out online, and she will do a brief version of minutes that will go out online. We just want to let folks know that. If you're the lucky folks sitting up here, she'll probably get a lot of your conversation on the microphone. But thank you so much for coming tonight. This is a great opportunity for us as we go through this process to get your input. And I'm going to give you a real quick history piece because I think many of you have been involved with this and you know where we're at. But if you're new to the process, we are very fortunate. We are in a building that is almost 100 years old. As one of our board members has said during our general obligation bond presentations, he likes to remind people that this building was built with the proceeds of a bond that was passed in 1916. And so from that standpoint, we've got a historic opportunity to hopefully do a 100-year renovation that they may be talking about in 2116. So we're pleased that you're here and are able to be part of that conversation. So as part of our facility master plan, one of the key renovations that we're going to do, one of the historic renovations, is for Mann Elementary School. We have had several conversations at the board table about what the renovations might look like. Part of that conversation then generated an opportunity for us to have a joint meeting with the Iowa City Council. And so the board and the City Council met together, talked about different parameters that they were interested in seeing taken into consideration when we did the design process. And the outcome of that meeting generated a couple of new options for us. I'm going to go through all those for you in a minute. But the reason that you're here tonight is we would like your input on the things that we need to make sure that we take into consideration when we share with the design team those things that are most important to the Northside neighborhood, to the Mann community, so that when they put together a design for the building and we bring that forward to the board, it meets your expectations. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to walk through the same slideshow that we shared with the City Council when we met with them. We will share with you the two designs that came about as a result of the joint input from the City Council and the board. And then at your tables, we're going to ask you to take a look at those and help us decide what are the attributes that are most important for us as we begin to develop a final plan for the renovations, and what are the things that you see in those plans that are significant concerns for you that we want to make sure we avoid as we go through that design process. So we'll walk through that. I'm going to walk through the slides with you. One of the things I do want to draw attention to, fortunately the sun has gotten to just the right angle, so it's not going to be in our eyes, but as you are working, you're going to have the opportunity to take a look at the slides which you have at your desk or at your table. But if you want to see a larger view of it, we've got blow-ups of all of those versions up here on the windowsill. So if it's easier for you to see it in a little bit bigger version, we're going to encourage you to get up and take a walk over there and take a look at it. We also have a couple things that are not in the slideshow over here on the left, which is a layout of the building, plus one of the discussion points that we had when we were talking to the City Council about what the neighborhood looks like and where some of the key areas are when we look at things like the historic designations. So with that, I'm going to walk you through the slides. I'll see what questions you have when we're done with that. Then I'm going to put you in your groups and put you to work. And on this gorgeous evening, we'll see what we can do about being expeditious with your time and giving you the opportunity to get out and enjoy the sunshine before the evening's over. So again, we had the opportunity to have both the City Council and the school board together. And so not knowing what their experience level was with Mann, some of the things you'll see in here are things that you're familiar with. So we've got a layout of the building. Whoops. We showed them the footprint. One thing I might draw your attention to as you look at this is one of the things that they were not as aware of is when you look at the layout of the building and you look at the area that is actually part of the Mann campus. One of the things that I'll just reach up here. Maybe I can put my finger in here. One of the things that the City Council was not as familiar with, that's not going to work real well, is right down here. There's a fence line in there on the south side of the campus. and there was a perception that maybe the area on the south side was actually part of the park and not part of the district property. So as you think about that from a mental construct, right side to the north, left side is south, that area that's next to the large green space is actually part of the district property. And so that was a question that came up from city councilors. This map is up here. This is the Goosetown Historic District, so you can see where man sits. It's the area that's in blue. The park is in red, and you can see how the historic district kind of wraps around it. So that was one of the conversations when we were talking about potential areas to expand. We talked to them about the analysis that was done of the facility itself when BLDD came in as part of the Facility Master Planning Steering Committee work and provided their analysis of the site. Some of the things that they mentioned that they thought would need attention as we went through the renovation process, the gymnasium and the multi-purpose room combination, making sure that we were ADA accessible and that people had the opportunity to access all floors of the building. They were concerned about the entrance not being ADA accessible. Obviously that would be addressed via an elevator. Those of you that are parents here know that the administrative offices are up half a flight. We'd like to get them at the ground level. Staff and visitor parking. They were concerned about the size of some of the rooms. So the pre-K, the kindergarten, and the music rooms would be smaller than we would like to see. The dedicated art room, we've had issues here in the past as enrollment has fluctuated where we've had to have art on a cart. And so having a dedicated art room would be really important. Public access to the media center, maybe just as a reference point for you, as we're going through and renovating current buildings or building new buildings, we're trying to make sure that there is community access so that there is after hours and weekend ability for those in the neighborhood to use some of the common spaces. The challenge that we have here and at Longfellow Elementary School is essentially the library is embedded into the academic space. So up here on the second floor, it's in between the hallways. It makes it difficult to use for community purposes outside of school hours. And then they talked about the amount of soft fall play area and hardscape play surfaces. Some things that they propose as part of that might be able to remedy this, acquiring adjacent properties to expand the size of the facility itself. Increased use of North Market Square Park. We had a long conversation about this with the city. We're very fortunate. The city is a great partner for us, allows us the opportunity to use park space during the day as part of our play space for the students. We had a great conversation with them about whether or not there might be opportunities moving forward to collaborate on putting play structures in areas that they currently have play structures that might be larger and better suited to the students here at the school. And then they talked about putting an addition on. So those of you that are familiar with what we're doing at Longfellow and the historic renovation that's planned to start there as soon as the school year was out, the intention was to do something that looks similar to that. So you see gymnasium, media center, administrative and nursing offices, and then additional space for simple circulation students as they move through the building. Some visuals here for you. Most of you are going to recognize these being neighbors or parents here. This is our softball play area. This is looking down into the park. Again, this is the current play structure that the city has, and this is one of the things that the city's discussed working with us collaboratively to expand the scope of this particular play structure so it serve more students. Some more play structures on the city campus. It's going to be a little bit hard to see here, but just to share with you that a significant part of the conversation that we had with the city when the councilors were in was to understand how man fits into the north side of the neighborhood and how that may be different than what we see on other campuses around the community. And we spent quite a bit of time collectively looking at the size of the building and the size of the campus and how that compared to other campuses in the district, and where there were concerns or weren't concerns, or where there might be opportunities for us to make compromises so that we could make sure that the integrity of the neighborhood was preserved as we looked at renovation options. Site acreage, I'll just bring this up because I just had a conversation just before the meeting started with someone who said that they didn't understand or weren't aware of the perspective of the differences in the size of the campuses around the district. So you see Man at the top there with a 1.65 acre campus. Some other feeder schools here into southeastern city, Lincoln, Hoover, Longfellow. Those of you that know Longfellow, for instance, similar building, different campus. We've got the large green space behind it that previously housed City High soccer field, so it's a little bit bigger campus. And for us, as we went through and made the renovation decisions for Longfellow, was a little bit easier just because we had a little bit more ground to work with. Building footprint is a percentage of the site, and when you think about the size of the campus here, size of the building, obviously you see Man down at the bottom. For those of you that know Lincoln, that also is a relatively small campus and perhaps has even less usable space because it's got the large ravine next to it. So it also has a large percentage of the physical campus occupied by the building. Square footage for playscapes, both hard and softball, and then the green spaces per student. And you can see down on the bottom, we've got a couple of our campuses that have more acreage, and so there's a little bit more play space on a per student basis. Again, Man, Lincoln, and Hoover with some of our smaller campuses with fewer square footage per student. Parking stalls, this has been a big conversation, and this will be a great opportunity for you at the tables when you're doing your work to have some conversation about this. What is an adequate number of parking spaces? And how does that fit into the campus? How does that work with walkability? The city has been a great partner in talking to us about what some options may be. So we've recently, after the joint meeting, talked about whether or not there might be some opportunity to do some angle parking south of the school when you walk around the park on the outside, not the inside where the park is, but on the outside. There's some easement space there. The city's proposed there might be some opportunity to do some angle parking there. They've also worked with us to say how many people come here on a daily basis, how many stalls would be needed in order to accommodate staff, parents, other visitors. How far afield would they have to go if they were to designate some of the on-street parking as not eligible for residents but only eligible for the school. So they did about 4 or 5 different mock-ups of that, whether it was linear down Church Street or whether they went out into the neighborhood. So again, they've been a great partner in trying to think through some options that we might have to address that. Some of the properties that we're talking about, and I'm sure again that most of you are going to be familiar with this, but the duplex, this is just south of the school, 618, 620 Fairchild, so that's right next to the park. This is right next to it. This house is on the National Historic Register, so this is 630 Fairchild Street. Across the street, we have 2 houses, 619, 623, right next to each other. And then one that actually carries a Dodge Street address, which is next to it on Fairchild, 427 North Dodge. And I'm going to walk through these relatively quickly until I get to the last 2. So when we met with the City Council, we brought in options A through G, which were really concepts where we simply tried to take the property itself and say, if we do a 10,000 square foot addition, which would accommodate the needs that we defined earlier, what would that look like on the campus? Where could that be placed in connection to the current spaces inside the building? And what options would there be then outside on the physical campus to address some of the other issues like hardscape play areas, softball play areas, parking, access, whatnot. So as you go through here, and again, as you walk down here, as you look at the slides that you have in front of you, you're going to see that we took that the representation of that physical space that we would like to add to the building, placed it in different areas on the west side of the building, either farther north or south, so you'll see that as you walk through here. And then we moved the parking around. We looked at traffic flow and some things like that. Some of the things that you'll see in here that aren't in the current plan that are important to understand that we're looking at and definitely very seriously looking at is the opportunity to do some bus drop-off out on Dodge Street. So the city has worked with us to say what would it look like if we were able to actually pull up buses southbound on Dodge and offload students on that right-hand side, right in front of the school. Obviously, that changes the need for some of the blacktop on the campus if we can do that out there. You're also going to see in a couple of these that we've said, is there a way for us to do parent drop-off off campus, if you will? Could we do that along Fairchild? Is there an ability for us to carve out a drop-off lane for parents on the south side of the campus? So again, I'm going to walk through these relatively quickly, but option A shows you the current existing man, shows you where the current hardscape is, where the softball play areas are. Oops, get down here to option A. And then to the west of the building there, you see the proposed addition. And in this case, this was one of the first discussions that took place where there was a significant acquisition of property and a transition of parking. As we walk down here, here's another option that was considered in terms of preserving Fairchild, having a parent drop-off. Option C was preservation of the house on the corner, but still maintained some parent drop-off around it. The reason I'm going through these relatively quickly, by the way, is we essentially, as we worked through this process with the city council and the board, we talked about, okay, we like these things, we don't like these things, and we got to H1 and H2. But I want you to see what these look like, because this may come up as part of the conversation at your table as you're looking for pros and cons for the campus as a whole. Option D on here again, preservation of some of the properties, shifted the building a little to the south, again, parent drop-off on here. Maybe point out, again, this is one of the ones where you see the bus drop-off out on Dodge Street. Option E, the building significantly further south here. Option F, again, some property acquisition on here, parent drop-off on Fairchild Street. Option G, again, shifting some of the playscapes around. By the way, maybe one thing to note on here, one of the things that came through as part of that conversation is how can we make sure that we're not separating playgrounds, both the hardscape play area and the softball play area. So that was a significant point of discussion with, do we not have H on here?
No,
Kristen, no H on here?
That's the original presentation.
Oh, that's the original presentation. All right. So do I not have H on here then?
Not on that, but they have it.
All right, so I'll walk through H then. So if you want to take a look at your, maybe I'll just pull up the existing one. All right. All right. Excellent. Is it both sides then? All right, so the single sheet that you have.
Could you throw out the square footage of the existing building?
Oh,
In the front?
yeah, square footage of the existing building?
Oh, on site as it is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I think it's just a little less than 14,000.
14?
I think so.
Okay, so one of the questions that was just asked was what's the current square footage? And Dwayne said he thinks it's about 14,000. So if you look at the single sheet, so that says H1 and H2. And looking at this, you'll see in reflection the input that we got as the City Council and the board had that joint discussion. So I'm looking at H1 right now on the front of it. And a couple of things that you're going to notice there is the hardscape and softball play area are right next to each other. And again, that was a big discussion from a supervision standpoint, from a flexibility standpoint. Whoops, I'm standing in the sunshine. Sorry about that. From a flexibility standpoint of making sure that students have the ability to transition back and forth between those two areas and having adequate supervision of parents.
About 13,900, it's 14.
Steve,
14?
yeah, I can get H1 and H2 up if you look at tonight's agenda. You want to just
Oh, yeah, sure.
the, the attachment to tonight's agenda.
So he said he can pull those two up, so we'll have them up in just a minute. Again, putting those hardscape softball play areas next to each other was a key component that came up as part of that conversation. Trying to put the building as far north as we could. The idea behind that was to preserve as much of that space south of the addition for play area for kids. And so part of that conversation, and you'll want to have this at your table tonight, is we're trying to look at it and say, how can we make sure that circulation patterns in here, utilization of students inside the school, can be accommodated by moving the building as far north as we can. Also trying to preserve daylight windows that exist in the building right now, so that if you're in a classroom, you're not going to have that bricked up so that we can put the addition next to it. So those are some of the things that came up. You see on H1, we've got parking to the north. There's a parent drop-off that comes off of Fairchild. There's a bus drop-off there on Dodge Street. If you got H1 up? All right, perfect. Thank you. So again, you see some of those elements in there. If we want to look at H2, so if you turn it over, you'll see again elements that came in as part of that conversation. So if you look along Fairchild Street, you'll see that there's a drop-off, a parent drop-off. So rather than actually having that take place on campus, where right now you circle through the parking lot to do that, that's on Fairchild. You see the busing drop-off is on Dodge Street. You see the original building there. You see the addition on the north side of that hardscape play area. And then the parking is north of that. Yes?
How many stories is the proposed addition?
Proposed addition is 1 story.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so that would include gymnasium. And so one of the things to think about when you think about the size of the windows on the gymnasium is when you think about the elevation, we've got some elevation change on the campus here. So where can we place a building so that it's up against the current facility, adjacent to it, but blocks as few of the daylight windows that are on the west side of the building as possible, so that teachers and students in classrooms still have access to daylight in there. So those of you that know the building and know where our classrooms are, that's one of the things that we're looking at really carefully as we look at the area south of the current gymnasium here. Yes?
I noticed that on H1 and H2, the existing housing south of Fairchild is no longer part of those plans. Does that change cost to reach rationale, or is there some barrier to that?
So one of the things that he asked about is if you look on H1 and H2, the houses that are south of Fairchild are not included in the development plan. That was part of the conversation that came about with the city council and the board at that particular meeting. And so what we wanted to do was make sure that what we put in here was reflective of the conversation that took place there. So one of the outcomes of that meeting was a clear understanding from the city council and the board that there was a level of agreement that we would look at the duplex that's south of the building, the blue duplex. And so you can see that that area right now actually is covered up with a softball play area and part of the hardscape play area. But the other remaining 4 facilities, the red house and then the 3 houses on the south side of Fairchild, are not included in this particular version. What's that? Yes, those 3, again, as I'll refer over here, when you look at the Goosetown Historic District, so those 619, 623, 427 right here, those are part of the Goosetown Historic District, and so that was part of that conversation that took place with the City Council.
Where's the main entrance in H1 and H2 for the building?
Great question. So he asked where the main entrance is. We don't have that on here yet. This is really simply a concept. Somebody asked how big is the current man? About 14,000 square feet. How big is the addition? About 10. So when we were looking at having it farther south, we could have come off Fairchild for the main entrance. If we push the building farther north, we'll probably bring the main entrance off Church Street. So that'll be part of the design elements that go into the project. Yes?
Are the 40 parking stalls, is the number of 40 stalls equivalent to the number of staff, or does it include parents?
It's actually undersized. One of the things that we did as part of the request from the city was to say how many staff members are in here on a daily basis, including itinerant teachers who are coming and going. And so we did the count for that. We won't be able to get enough stalls on here to accommodate all of those folks, plus ensure that there's room for ADA parking and parent parking. So we presume that as it works now, we'll have to have some on-street parking.
But is this the number that's equivalent to the staff, or does it include some parent parking?
This would include, we would have some designated parking in here for parents, for traveling teachers, and then regular daily staff that were here would be out on the street for some of those areas.
Just start one more follow-up.
Yeah.
So what is the number of stalls that would be needed without the parent parking? How many parent parking stalls?
Oh, do you remember? We did a total on that, Julie. Do you remember what that number is? Yeah, I think that sounds right. I think 56 was the total when we did all staff plus all itinerant staff. So we know we're not going to get 56 stalls on here, so we know there'll be some off-street parking for staff. And that was one of the reasons we had conversation with the city about whether there might be an opportunity to designate some near staffing or near parking for staff.
Has
Yes?
there ever been any exploration of an option to lease parking from the Ace Hardware? Because I've never seen that end of their parking utilized.
So her question was, what about the hardware store diagonally across the street here? Might be there be an opportunity to lease some parking from them? There may very well be. One of the things that the city had said to us was, when you build a building, the city tells you how many parking spots you need for it. We're going to need a waiver for that. And they're comfortable giving us a waiver for that. Part of that's the conversation of what does on-street parking look like, and can we have some designated parking for staff here. They were reluctant to have us use that as part of a long-term solution because they simply can't control what might happen to it in the future. So not opposed to that as a solution, but don't want to use it as part of the parameters for us and our decision making. So definitely something that we as a district can explore, but as the city said, don't consider that your permanent solution, because that wouldn't be something that might necessarily be there forever.
The church has Alzheimer's leased to Mercy Hospital.
Right, and Dwayne brought up, we had talked to the church. Right now they lease their parking during the weekdays to Mercy, so they have staff parking there. So right now that's not open. Might it be open in the future? Potentially. So what do we, oh yes, sir.
I live on Brown Street, and every day, people come from outside of town to park on Brown Street, Longo's, Johnson, wherever. And they're getting free parking. So why not just take that away from them?
And that's what the city's proposed. The city has said that there is an opportunity for them to designate Horace Mann staff, visitor, however we want to describe it, but a Horace Mann parking. They talked about, they actually ran a model for us that said if it was 56 stalls, how far down, if they just went straight down Church Street, what would it look like? And then they said, if we were simply to do it in as geographically compact an area, what would that look like? They didn't want to say that they had a final plan for it because they want to have dialogue with the neighbors first about what would be the best places, the best streets, etc. Consider that. One of the other things that they talk about, which if you look down on the north-south section of Fairchild, on the right-hand side, they said that in the easement there, there's a possibility that they could put some angle parking in there. So they're not sure how many stalls that would be, but that's another option. One of the things that they said was, we always need to remember as homeowners that although we mow it and maintain it, that area between the street and the sidewalk actually belongs to the city. So if they want to have a green space, that's fine, but if they wanted to turn it into angle parking in front of your house, they have the right to do that. So that might be an option for them to consider too. They're not sure how many spots they could get in there. Yes?
Did anyone look at, I was thinking about the road that goes around the pool over in City Park, how it's one way, and so they fit a lot of angle parking in there. Did that get looked at as far as?
We didn't get that far into it. If you missed that, she said, what if you did a one-way around the park? That might give you the opportunity to free up a lane of traffic, which then might create more space for some angled parking. So we hadn't gotten that far into it. 1, 2, 3. Yes?
Yes, if people want to visualize a little bit how possibly that angle parking might look, if you have the option Z on your table, which came out of some neighborhood people putting it together, that would at least show you, if you just want to get a sense of what, now that actually is like, but just to get a sense.
Yeah, it's about 10 stalls down there.
Yeah, people
Yeah.
want to see what that might want to look like, yeah.
Before my question, I can't tell you how excited and happy we are to even be having this conversation for those of us who have lived in this neighborhood for over 20-some years. We really, yeah, and many more. I know there's adult children, parents of many adult children, so we are thrilled that we are even at this stage tonight. And I, love all the different plans and the trend, how we moved on and morphed into what the neighborhood is looking at. To clarify, in 2019, when the renovation would be completed, our boundaries would be different at
Yes,
that point.
they would.
And so it would expand towards
You go
Regina area.
right over towards Scott Street and up towards the highway, and so think about it as a rectangle with the top of it being curved along 80 there.
So kind of instead of going
West,
west, we
Go
can
east.
now expand to east, which,
Correct.
And I like with the parking, the parking situation, because people will be maybe traveling from, further areas, that may not be bused the way they currently work. The need for parking obviously is important. I do like, there's some creative things that I think you are looking at, that we could definitely have more than what we have now and probably accommodate what we're looking at to make it great for the people who live in the neighborhood, yet also convenient for those who are doing drop-off, pick-up, and want to come and participate in activities here. So.
exactly the balance that we're working on. I think next and then over here.
I had
Yes.
heard some rumor, I was curious about the possibility of the Red House becoming part of the school.
Not at this time. Right now, the district is, again, based on the conversation, I'm sorry, I didn't repeat the question. He asked about the Red House becoming part of the school district, and I said not at this time. One of the things that the district is looking at, again, is the blue duplex that's on the south side as part of that conversation at the city council meeting. And again, to the response to the question over here, you'll see that the Red House and the houses south of Fairchild right now are not part of that mix, not part of the discussion.
To clarify, I wasn't talking about tearing it down, but
Right.
the building itself. Okay.
Right. At this point in time, we hadn't looked at any of the other 4 parcels as part of the solution. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. You were next, and then back here.
Okay, and I think I may know the answer to this already, but has underground parking been explored as part of the addition? Because that seems like,
We don't have enough money.
well, that's.
Yeah.
what I-
She had asked, is underground park, has that been explored as part of the addition? We do know that from a couple of earlier projects, that issue came up, and so we started talking about, well, what would a ramp look like? And one of the things that we discovered is phenomenally expensive, and so it really eats into the amount of money that winds up being available for doing the project. So we struggle with that, and we look at it, and to be honest with you, we look at it and say, can't really justify putting that much money into parking. So we scrapped
It is
that
a
idea.
dense area,
Yes.
so you have to.
Yeah. There was a hand up back here. Yes, ma'am.
I would just reiterate, Peter, how great it is for people that have been in the neighborhood for a long time. We've been having this discussion for so long, it seems like they're
Very excited about that.
Yeah, it's great. And I also want to reiterate the comment the gentleman over here made, that really this whole extended neighborhood is a parking lot for the university. So I live on Fairchild, I would be very, very happy if my whole street was for teacher parking or for other kinds of parking. I mean, obviously you need a small number of parking people that have facilities that need to be right close, but I hate to see the whole front of the school become a parking lot. And I'm also like just thinking, even as I'm doing it, that why for this campus is it all the discussion of like parking. And I just one final comment. Years ago, when the students that were in international housing, lived quite a long way away, was that way. We routinely had school events. We alternated so that sometimes people in our neighborhood would take a bus out to an event that was out there, and then the next year that event would be, they would get bused in here. So we have in the history of the school dealt with trying to make events successful and people who do not live right along.
Sure. Put your hand up over here and then back here. Yes.
How many people in a day or a week typically drive their kids to school? I mean, is it enough that you really need that kid much real estate to drop off and pick up?
We presume that given the observation earlier that we're going to have a change in boundaries, that we would want to make sure that we have a minimal space available for parent pickup and drop off. And one of the things that we did to try to minimize that, if you look at H2 in particular, you see that what we did was we used that easement space that the city has control of. We actually put the parent pickup and drop off on Fairchild so that what's green space now, what's easement between the sidewalk and the street would actually wind up being a parent pickup and drop off space so that there would be a minimal intrusion on the campus. So enough space for them to do it, but hopefully not excessive asphalt for that. One here, then there's a hand there, and then up here. Yes.
I'm just really grateful for being part of this conversation, but I'm speaking on behalf of Zion Lutheran, and we think of this as our school. We really like what we get to do here in terms of English language learning and support and being involved with the students and the population. It's been a real gift to us and inspired us for lots of mission. So
Thank you for being part of that. Yes. Back here? Yes.
Okay, I don't want to raise my hand, but you messed up about it. Yeah, as far as, this, I think this living really close to here, I think there's already some unofficial drop-off places, which I'm totally fine with. I would say that, between my Crusoe and my house,
Right.
That's pretty much what it is. And that's, I would say probably 20 spots that are unofficial. But it's, it's an hour a day total. And it's fine. And technically, right outside of Crusoe is non-parking. It is for drop-off. Now, whether it's designated drop-off for Crusoe or for the school, doesn't matter, but it works. I say if that's 20 people plus, a few that some of the less intrusive options offer, I think that would probably be sufficient, even with some of the changes. I think the right balance just needs to be struck within catering to the teachers and the staff, but also who are our customers, right? Who are the customers? The customers are
Kids.
Yeah, the kids. I think, right? That's what we're here for, correct? I don't know. I'm new to this, so I'm yet a kindergarten. But I think that that we have to think of that. And as far as the size of the extension, what do we really need something that's ginormous? Does it make sense? Is that what we really need? Like how do we strike that right balance? I understand the matters of equity between schools and things like that, but maybe some that are more recent have gone overboard. And does that mean that is that what we have to follow? We're obviously a different school. We understand that our footprint within the urban landscape is really small compared to others. That was on the presentations. You can't really compare us with something that is being built out on a cornfield. It's impossible to compare. So how do we strike that balance? And finally, I think I have one more thought. No, I did. I'd seen before I have a family member who was a planner up in Marion. He had something great, which was an overlay of a downtown area with a Walmart parking lot, and showing how much people are okay parking. At the end of a parking lot, you could do the Colville Bar, you could do any mall. Compare that to the footprint of a neighborhood, and try doing that, because then you will realize that indeed people are okay walking from a couple blocks away.
Sure.
It's okay.
Sure.
I mean, we sometimes have inclement weather, but we're not in like Latin. We're not in northern Norway. We're okay. It's okay. If it rains a little bit, we'll be supposed to. So I think that's maybe an idea, whether it's done conceptually or just as
Sure.
as just this one little argument. I don't think we even need to do it. I think we will realize that footprint would extend quite far.
Exactly. I think over here was, 1, 2, 3. Boy, I'm going to run out of the numbers here. Let's do these two and then we'll go. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to make a comment about the parent drop-off. One, with the current situation. Twice crossing Church Street with my children with the crossing guard, somebody has run the light or turned while texting, and just almost hit the crossing guard. So that's twice, and my kids are in kindergarten and second grade. So I think and then I've tried dropping my kids off in the front. It's a little crazy with everybody's running, the kids are running across. So there's a little bit of a safety concern, and with the expanded boundaries, with families coming from as far as Scott Boulevard, there is going to be more dropping off and not the ability to walk. So I think that it's a valid consideration. But my question I had is, what is the cost difference in these so that we can consider how much of the money in the budget is going to be devoted to the children versus parking or, blacktop?
So what you have in here is really a concept drawing. So what I can tell you is that the building square footage in all of the versions that we brought forward is the same size. So we're looking at the same amenities on the inside of the building. Now, shifting it farther north or south could have an impact on the price. Once you get out there, you look at the slope that we have here, you think about what's the soil underneath there. We don't know what that looks like yet. that could influence the cost. But if we just presume that the cost of the building, regardless of how far south or north we put it, is relatively stable, what that does then is it gives us a budget to work with outside the building, and whether it's softball play area, hardscape, or the asphalt for any type of pickup drop-off lane, bus lane, etc. That'll be a relatively fixed amount because, again, the board has approved a scope for the project. So
150.
Dwayne says we've got about $150,000 or $200,000 to think about that outside space, and the rest of it really is going to be devoted to the facility itself, the addition, and probably more importantly, back to the earlier comment, remodeling inside and going all the way up to the top and redoing the space inside. So the lion's share of the work is going to take place inside the building. So when we get those designers on board and they give us the feedback on that, that's going to be very consistent. What we want to make sure that we do, and what we've asked you to come here tonight to do, and I want to make sure that I hear from people who have their hands up, but then I want to make sure that we get you to work at the table so we can get your insight and your feedback, is to make sure that when we decide where the building goes, where the addition goes in relation to the building right now, we put it in such a place so that the work that we do at the outside, on the outside of the facility, reflects your priorities. So how far north or south, where the hardscape and softscape play areas are, whether they're adjacent to each other or separate, how much parking there is, whether we have a dedicated space for parent drop-off, for bus drop-off. We want to make sure that when the designers come in and we give them a list of the non-negotiables, we're able to reflect your thinking to them as they go through that process. So that's one of the things we want to make sure that we get out of this process. All right, now I got to remember who was next, which I probably can. Over here? Yeah.
So I love that the city is so collaborative with us, and I think it's also worth noting that this is a Blue Zone school, and it's a school with a very kind of healthy relationship to the neighborhood and the environment. And so I think the proposal for designating parking on like Fairchild and not building more, not adding more blacktop to anything, you know, like I think that's brilliant and something that should be investigated. And so I wonder what, you know, what sort of, is that something that we can consider when we're considering these plans? And
You can.
Then
Yes.
what's the path to getting that actually?
So for instance, if you look at Plan H2, make sure I'm on the right side without my glasses here, yeah. So if you look at Plan H2 and you look to the east of the park on Fairchild, this map doesn't show potential angled parking on that easement area, because that was a conversation that came up with the city after we drafted these plans.
But I'm not proposing angled parking, I'm just saying designating, you know, parking during certain hours.
Oh, sure.
On the street.
Yep.
You know, I mean, this happens in other cities where there are neighborhood schools like
Right.
this. And so there's no modification to the landscape, but it's just a matter of, you know, claiming that space. And then, you know, I think, you know, having ADA accessible parking for people who need it is important, but there's this like Blue Zone spirit of the school where a lot of people walk, and then to park a little distance and walk in is also going to be good for mental health. So, yeah.
Yes, it will. So to that end, so her question was, you know, where do we put that down? That's part of our exercise tonight, is to make sure that we gather that information from you. Okay, let's see. I think next and then next. Yes.
All right. So I was a PTO president here 10 years ago. This is the 100th year of this.
It is.
And we've been hearing for the past 10 years that we're going to get a remodeling. I'm very glad that we're getting closer. How much of this is looking towards the future, though? We're finally getting caught up to where all the rest of the buildings are. Is this going to be good for 10 years, 20 years? I mean, this is like our one shot. So if we don't do it right now, we're going to be screwed. Our neighborhood's going to be screwed. We need to do it right.
And that's part of when somebody earlier was mentioning how do we come up with what spaces we need for the inside. So when we're looking at 10,000 square feet, we actually, that was part of the process, was to say, okay, this is a 1916 to 2016 iteration. If we're really thinking of 2016, sorry, maybe if I stand over here. If we're thinking a 2016 iteration to a 2116 iteration, we want to make sure that we've got the capacity in the building to handle current students, future students, to think about changes in education between now and then, to think about how this building is functional in the neighborhood, so that if we want to use it for more lighted schoolhouse ideas after hours and on the weekends, that the building is built in such a way that we can close the doors on the academic wings and keep the doors open on the community wing. So that's part of the design process. Those are the elements that we have as our baseline, is to make sure that we're taking that into consideration. So we're really trying to plan for 21-16. Yes?
Will you discuss and hear your input about option Z at the North Center for this?
Yeah, and do I have a copy of it? I don't know if I have one handy. Oh, there we go. So at our last board meeting, you should have these at your table, the option Z. So we had an interested community member who came in. I know he's not able to make it here tonight. I had a conversation with him yesterday. But he put together a plan that moved the building north, created some additional potential play space area, whether it was hardscape or soft surface play area. And then he gave this isn't the version that he had for the board, so he sent a new one. We printed the new one out, where he went through and did some analysis on some of the things that he thought were beneficial for doing this shift. And so, oh, I'm sorry, Kristen's got it. Thank you. So you've got another version in here that, again, community member shared this. One thing I will say is that I had Dwayne take a look at this and say, how big is this addition? And Thomas would tell you he just dropped this on here without knowing what square footage it is. This addition is actually larger than what we're planning for the building right now. So if it was to be parallel in scope to what we'd already planned in terms of square footage, it would be smaller than what he shows on here. So that's something I think that's important to keep in mind as you take a look at it. Yes?
A few things. I would say in H1 and H2, I would hate to be that red house. Because I have people dropping off their kids all morning and all afternoon right in front of my house. I can't get in my driveway. Or I have people parking right up next to my yard. I would also say that we're making this beautiful addition, and it's going to be hiding behind a parking lot on Church Street. I live on Church Street. I'd rather look at our beautiful building than some parking stalls. So I think Z is certainly something to consider. I would also say that in reference to, the traffic on Church is really, our kid almost got hit too. It happens all the time. If there is some designated parking along Church Street, that might calm some traffic as well. Since it is a school zone, so.
Yeah, very much so.
Advantage to having parking on one side of Church, for sure.
Yes. I think back here, then I'll try to come back here. Yes.
So that we can consider viable options, with H1 and H2 being a result of the city council's input, is these existing homes, are they taboo to be, because of historic designation? Are they off the table now?
What I'll share is feedback from that meeting. So we know that 3 of the houses are in the Goosetown Historic District, and so that would take action through the City Council. We know that the Red House is on the National Historic Register, so that has some prohibitions with it. And I know that one of the city councilors that was present was concerned that we had options that didn't include the 3 houses in the Goosetown district, which the city has more influence over than they do over the Red House, because that's a national historic issue and not part of the city purview. But again, we tried to reflect a majority of the opinions that we heard at that meeting. And again, part of the reason that we're here today is if that's something that you feel very strongly about, we want you to tell us that, and we can take that back to the board.
I'm Alicia Bell. I'm the director of Friends of Historic Preservation. I served for a number of years as the chair of the Historic Preservation Commission. When a house is in a historic district or is a local landmark, which actually the National Register status isn't what's important, it's the local landmark status. The city has decided this house is important to our history as Iowa Cityans. That a house can only be removed from either a district or a local status if it is structurally unsound and able to be repaired. So
that's the Red House.
That would be
Or
all three, all four
okay.
houses actually.
Okay.
And so those houses, according to city code, really can't be moved.
Okay.
So we should not consider then.
That's what I mean, yeah, we just should
There's
not
lots of them. Spend our time on this, where they're part of it.
They can't be removed or.
They can't
can't be
go.
removed, but could there be a potential for moving the red house, for example?
Absolutely not. It would lose its eligibility. Part of our local status is based on National Register eligibility. We have checked with the state. It would lose its eligibility, so it can't be moved.
Yes.
Gotta get to the jazz concert, the 8th grade jazz concert. As a parting thought, I really encourage the collaboration with the city to designate on-street parking for teachers, and then use the precious parking on our small site for ADA and for traveling staff and for staff who need to pull in and move a whole lot of stuff to their classroom or something like that.
Unless we do that on the south
And
side.
as you're designing for 100 more years, realize that parking is going to change over those 100 years, and new cities, not new cities, bigger cities with bigger parking problems have, app-based parking where you say, I need a spot close to the university, and it says, take this turn, there's your spot. And it's already been reserved for you. So things are heading that direction, and I think, just saying, we need X parking spots in a big lot is designing for today, but maybe not for 20 or 30 years from now.
Yeah. Yes.
Hi, Stevie Toomey. So, this is my name. I really enjoy the idea of having designated parking with the existing space. And so a solution, a possible solution, would be to have a blinking light, right, like a yield sign for children walking across the street. And what about an option of putting a stop sign at Church Street and Johnson Street? So that there's blinking lights, okay, so you're warning further east of Church that a school crossing zone is coming, but then also you have a stop sign. Now, just one block away from the issue here at the street.
Sure. Coupled with some of that on-street parking, like you mentioned before, from a traffic calming standpoint. I'm gonna say timeout for just a minute here, because I know with the concert thing that made me turn around and look at the clock. One of the things we want to make sure that we do is we capture your thoughts. So what we'd like you to do is at your table with a couple of your elbow mates there, we would like you to take some time and to write down those elements that you're most in favor of when you think about this, and the ones that you have the greatest concern that we don't want to see as part of the design process. Our goal then is to take those and develop a master list, which when we then sit down with the designer, we can say, do these, don't do these, so that when we come back to the board, we should be able to give them a list of your input and the design, and they should be able to see your input in the design. So given the fact that it's just about 7 here, we'd like you to spend a little bit of time doing that. We'll come back together before you leave, so don't run off, and get some report out.
the addition over here, you can still have get the building up. It doesn't have to take up this whole space.
I think that
This one is, this, to be fair, this building is set back right there. It doesn't discourage. When you're talking about the parking, they would say, well,
It's going to be a plus for us, right?
so I think you could
Please do.
look to do what I think would be cool would be to move this building up and turn this into some kind of pedestrian entry point. Put the building up here and then make this 20 stories instead. So let's focus on that. Well, let's stay on H1. Let's keep our focus. Let's digest this. Disadvantage is pavement, all sides. Less play area. Very small play area.
So are you saying, like,
Yeah, this house is an island of pavement. This house. It doesn't do the house. It doesn't do.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not good for the house being on the historic register. It's just in any way, shape, or form. It's dangerous. It's dangerous for anybody who's coming across these streets. So I really don't like it. It doesn't have anything to do with school. It has stuff to do with other advantages of this are pulling the drop-off areas off of church. That's an advantage. It does a good job of pulling the drop-off away from this business street. In terms of the building, it utilizes, like he said, the sun comes up and it travels like this, so it doesn't interfere with, the open. Existing windows and natural light.
I don't have very much to say.
So, H2, the good things are again bus drop-off. That's in my opinion. I like the bus drop-off. You're going to have a bus drop-off. He needs to go. He's going to have to go.
Plenty of bus drop-off.
I really like this. I like Newsom Parkway.
Why is your printing so messy today?
Because I'm writing fast. Newsom Parkway from Church Street. sort of centralized. I think it would be better served pulled away from the split the play areas. Good group.
Yeah, it's a good turnout.
Use that as a differentiation. They're excited.
Yeah.
Like, kids are just going to rock it.
It's here.
This is our play anyway, so who cares if there's family?
Right.
And then, yes, that splits the difference. This can be just a little employee lot, so it doesn't need an in and an out. It just needs a single, very unused. They come in here, they park during the day, and then there's not much, going on. And then this is a drop-off area down here. The central drop-off point is center of this with a walkway that comes up. I'm going to call that H3 RD option. Do I like the idea of doing something else here?
I'm going to try to keep our promise to get you out of here by 7:30. So hopefully you've taken some good notes for us. We really appreciate that. I've had some great side conversations with many of you. Before you wrap up, what I'd like to do is, and we can certainly give you some extra time after that, if there's any major ahas that weren't shared during our earlier what's that? All right. If there are any other major ahas that you think is important for the rest of the community here to hear and understand, we'd like to give you a few minutes to share those. So again, in your conversations, when you think about either advantages or disadvantages, if there's something that we missed that you want to make sure that everybody else hears, now is the time to share those. Yes, ma'am.
I asked a question in the the addition that they propose is not a multi-story building. It is a single-story building, but with a very high profile because it's mostly a gym and a
Gym and library.
media
Right.
room, and then office space, which they decided to celebrate the first floor. But I just put in there, maybe to the extent possible, try to build up to reduce the footprint and get more area for other things. So I just, in throwing it out, everybody should know that it's not a multi-story addition. Right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've heard people have concern about or wonder if we need such a large gymnasium. And I was remembering that the first Horseman plan had us building it a little bit larger, and then demographers informed a different plan which has Horseman a little bit smaller in scope. And so for those who are concerned about the next 100 years, I was wondering if we err on the side of having a larger gym for flexible use if we need it. I was just ruminating on that a bit. I don't want that, like, instead of having any play space, but I was considering that if we're worried about being relevant in 75 years as we see our immediate neighborhood grow. And additionally, I want to say that I'm under the impression, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this doesn't happen unless the GO bond passes, correct?
That is correct.
So I just want to make sure people know that the GO bond has to pass for this to happen.
Yes, thank
So
you.
we're excited that the district is committed to this, but you need to make sure you understand, what the GO bond is about and vote for it.
And that was one of the side conversations that somebody had asked, and this is, when you look at the general obligation bond, this is on the other side of that door. So this is our first project after we come out of the bond. Yes, sir.
As a follow-up to maybe both was comments, in option Z, if you took, obviously we all know that the building, this is too big on the map, but if you take a reasonable chunk out of that, say, half of that, two whatever, you still keep parking on the left, it's currently existing already. And then you could potentially have a two-story one. There's already less blocking of natural light because of where it is compared to the current building. So you could still have say 7,500 feet on the ground and on 2 levels. You bring it to 1,500. Or the 10,000, even the 10,000 seems to still work there. I think light.
Yes.
I'm currently involved in something in my work life, and I think the main thing for building to me is light.
Yes.
And I think any other option than Z seems to block a lot of that sunshine.
Yes, and we want to try to avoid blocking windows and making sure that there's as much natural light as possible. One of the other side conversations, if you know Northwest Junior High, because of the era in which it was built, no windows. We don't want kids to be distracted. Bad idea. So we're actually now having to go through and put windows in to try to get some daylight in there. It's very difficult to do. So light is incredibly important.
Light tunnels, solar tubes,
Leak like a snow.
Our problem is some of those are 2-3 stories down.
I would think that if you can do that at the Lenny Library, it's great. Because it's also great.
Any other ahas as we get ready to wrap up? Yes, ma'am.
As we're looking at options H1 and 2 and option Z, one of the things that became really apparent was that option Z creates more of a buffer zone for the kids while they're playing. It keeps them away from traffic and like a chain link fence just is not enough, especially when people are going that fast. So option Z really creates that campus feel that has a really nice safe buffer zone for those.
If you missed that, she was talking about using the facility itself as a methodology to maintain a buffer zone between traffic and students. And that again is really reflected in that conversation that the City Council and the board had together, where they said we need to keep our playscapes contiguous with each other. Yes?
What happens to the existing building itself?
I'm sorry. I kind of glossed over that. I forget what everybody knows and don't know. He asked, what happens to the building itself? So what we will do is a historic renovation with the facility itself. I don't know if any of you are familiar with renovations at Penn or at Twain, at Lucas, at Coralville Central. But we will actually come into this building and literally top to bottom go through and do a wholesale renovation. When you think about a building that's 100 years old, some of the challenges that we have in here, if you scrape under the 65 layers of paint, eventually at some point in time you're going to find asbestos under there. We've got galvanized pipe in here. We've got other environmental hazards that make it really difficult for us to do a renovation with students and staff in place. So we'll actually pull the students out for a year. It'll allow us to literally go top to bottom. New windows, new paint, new flooring, new HVAC system in here for anybody that's ever been in here on a hot day on the 3rd floor. Cook a pizza on your hand. So we'll take care of that. All the electric system in here, the plumbing system will all be redone. So if you talk to anybody at those 4 schools, when they walk back into their school, they say it's like coming into a new building. So that's part of the process that'll happen here.
I'll just chime in real quick about that. I'm a librarian at Coralville Central, and I do want to say that the top to bottom is fairly accurate, but we love our new school, and we're very, very fortunate, and we feel like morale just like jumped up. I am a firm believer that there was learning happening from like day 1 at our school, whereas before it would have been so hot in there that everybody would have been dragging. So will be beautiful once it's done.
But lesson learned, right? No lava on the tile squares, right? We put tile squares in there and they have different colors, and the one is a reddish color, which is lava apparently, which you hop from square to square. So our staff told us no lava squares in your next carpet job. So lesson learned. There were a couple other hands up.
Speaking of staff, what does the current Horace Mann staff think of all these? I see a lot of teachers here.
Yep, so we've had the opportunity to have dialogue with them. One of the things, much of the input that we've heard is very similar to what people have voiced here. It's an iterative process with the staff. They're very involved. Our next piece is we secure a design team then we'll take your input and we actually sit down with the staff. And the staff have a large amount of input with the design team as they go through it. They live in the house, so we need to understand from them, what does the flow look like as kids move from here to there? How do we need to take that into consideration? What do the traffic patterns look like? Where are the high use areas? When do they happen during the day? And so the design team will get a lot of input from the staff as they go through that. So that will be reflected in the final plan that gets brought to the board. If anybody's ever been at a board meeting when we bring final design plans in, it's not uncommon, I don't know if you were part of that, it's not uncommon to actually have the teachers in as part of the presentation team because they've been such an integral part in that design process. There were a couple other hands up. Yes, ma'am.
Well, woman over here who was commenting was talking about safety in terms of play area. One of the things that came up in our group was concern about potential safety of a drop-off on North Dodge. And even though you're letting kids out on the side away from the street, it's still an extremely busy area, and people were citing that as a concern. Just wanting to look at other options.
Sure.
Yeah, so we just a petition for our team, for our group. So we thought that parking on Fairchild, the drop-off, not parking,
Yes.
the drop-off on Fairchild would might stay under the chart.
Yeah, and if you can't hear that, they were talking about the parent drop-off and the bus drop-off. Yeah, and
the buses could pull in on Fairchild.
right, and we had looked at the bus drop-off on Fairchild, or on Dodge rather, as a way to separate it from the parent drop-off, so that there were two separate areas. Obviously, safety is a significant concern. We've had that conversation, had some discussion with the city about it too. One of the things that we had talked about with the city was that would never be anything more than a bus drop-off. We never wanted parents dropping off there. But I would agree with you that there are definitely going to be concerns due to the speed issues you cited earlier and people texting and driving on coming southbound. Yes? Sure. And that might be an option for us too. When we did the concept pieces, we really only looked at campus itself. But knowing where the city's at in terms of their willingness to cooperate with us, I think there's a lot of opportunities to expand that conversation. Yes?
Something that we too noticed, that if you move the building addition north towards Church Street and then have the parent drop off there, the parents in the drop off would be right near the main administration building, which is where we always need to run in to check on our kids, check out our kids. So moving that north instead of and taking over that larger kind of parking area.
Sure.
Drop off makes sense if we had like 15-minute parking.
So one of the things that she said was parent drop-off on the north side. One of the things I'll share with you is that when we initially started to look at parent drop-off on Fairchild, that's when conceptually we've been considering the main entrance on the south side. So we left that piece in there, but obviously we'll want to make sure that drop-off is, we talked about that flow inside the building. We look at flow outside the building too. So we want to make sure that parent drop-off has some relationship to the front door as students are going in and out. Got a couple minutes left. Any other last ahas that people want to share with the group as a whole? Yes, back here.
Just because I haven't heard any current Uber parents speak up, I'm just going to speak on their behalf. I'm a current Uber parent. We'll be moving here in 2019. We're so excited to be a part of this school. And what the ending plan looks like doesn't make a huge difference to me. It makes a much bigger difference to you. I'm sure the inside can be beautiful. What I care about most is that there's a safe drop-off spot for parents. I think there's going to be a lot more parents dropping off from our neighborhoods who are going to be coming to this school, and also that there's adequate play space somewhere in Hoover and other schools in the area.
Yes.
I want to just kind of piggyback off of that. Just because I want to make sure I have the facts if people ask me or if I talk about this. So we're looking, option Z had a lot of parking, like city parking, which would the city then be in charge of maintaining, and the cost then goes from the school district to the city to maintain that, correct?
Yes.
All right. Second, if we put, just so I have the facts, if you look at option 1, H1 or H2, which has a 40-stall parking lot, does that decrease the play space? A parking lot that size would decrease the play space for students on site, is that correct?
It could, yeah.
Okay.
Keep in mind right now we've got the parking in those options is north of the building, and one of the things that we heard pretty loudly, and I think we're hearing it now from a couple of the comments, is the importance of keeping the playscapes contiguous with each other. So, and I know we've heard this from staff before, as soon as you separate playscapes, you use one or the other because you don't have the supervision to use both. So it may or may not, because we may or may not want to put playscape on the other side of the building depending on how far north we go. Yes?
I just wanted to comment something that came up in our group from a current staff member, is that if you look at option Z, it might deceptively look like there is a lot of free play area, but that's actually city property, and if there aren't enough staff to supervise kids, or if there's something unsafe going on in public areas, then they can't play there. Or if the district budget drops and our student-to-teacher ratio changes, then that may not be an option for playing. So just keeping that in mind, that it looks really good on paper, but sometimes logistics of what happens during the school day with staff and kids and what happens in the neighborhood and with the college campus, it's quite the party campus and everything right here, just all of those things and keeping our kids under.
Chris?
You know, since we see wrapping up, I heard diversity of opinions from different tables on different issues. I'm just wondering if we have a plan for sort of capturing or aggregating.
Yes. We want all of your sheets, so please do not leave your checkout before you walk out the doors to make sure that we get your sheets. And then we're going to aggregate. And it could be that you wrote on this sheet, but you could have written on the maps. We want to gather as much as we can. So if you wrote input on any of the sheets, please don't leave before you share those with us.
And also, there is the option of thinking about it for a while and then emailing us.
Absolutely.
board@iowacitischools.org.
Yep.
Or Merlin.Stevens.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We greatly appreciate it. I know it's been gray and gloomy for a couple of weeks, and this is one of the first nice nights. So for you to give us your time, we sincerely appreciate that. Thank you so much for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.